I'm glad to be here today. My name is Kent Jones. I am the state engineer and happy to be serving in that capacity. I'm glad to be able to be asked to come back to Cache Valley. This year marks the year where I have now lived outside of Cache Valley the same number of years I've lived inside of Cache Valley. It's kind of an interesting thing. As I come back to Cache Valley, it still seems like home. And I really love it here, actually. I still have family here that I get to come and see, and we visit quite a bit. I noticed as I drove along Main Street, I was just looking at some of the buildings in different places as I drove through town, and I had some memories of youth. Unfortunately, every memory I had was a different spot where I got in trouble. I don't know what that is. I must have had an interesting childhood. Maybe that's just all that's stuck in my head about what's happening. But it's fun growing up here, and I had a great childhood and great education. I had the opportunity to go to Utah State University and graduate from there, and I appreciated that. I was worried about those cheerleader pictures they showed. I understand that they were from one of the football games here at USU. I was hoping one of them wasn't me, but it wasn't. So I understand that's where they came from, right? I appreciate the opportunity to talk about water in the state, and I'm going to talk a little bit, some of the things that Sterling talked about, but I want to talk to you about some concepts of beneficial use of water today that I'm very concerned about what's happening in the state and opinions about what people have in their minds about what their water right is and what the limitations of those rights are. There was a question earlier about groundwater recharge, too, and I'll try to address that a little bit as I go through here. I think I can talk about that. This first slide is just a summary of some of the water right bills, and I'll just hit them quickly because Sterling did a good job as he went through some of the things as they related to his interest and the Farm Bureau's interest in those bills that have been passed. The House Bill 39 is the water rights amendments, and that is Representative Draxler's bill that he sponsored to help clean up some of the things that we needed to have addressed. And we appreciate Representative Draxler and his willingness to be involved in the water law development and helping watch water laws and helping to support proper decisions that are being made concerning water rights laws in the state. And he's been active working with us over the years to address these kinds of issues. Senate Bill 10 and 20 are both dealing with groundwater management plan areas where local districts have been formed. They kind of work together. Senator Stoll was working specifically to try to get some problems resolved in the Borough Enterprise area, which we have the opportunity of having a meeting with those people at 9 o'clock in the morning tomorrow. We're going to go down and start processes again. About 2 years ago, we moved into that area to kind of talk about problems. They've had over 200 feet of decline in some areas in the groundwater. They've had some land subsidence in the area that they're attributing to the groundwater withdrawals and some real problems. And the state engineer a few years ago went into the area to try to get things resolved. What are we going to do to fix this situation? There's some significant overpumping. It's exceeding safe yield by at least 45%. And we need to get things in balance. And so a plan was proposed, maybe somewhat a little bit forcefully at that time, and there was some kind of conflict trying to come up with the best resolution. I've been working with those groups down there and suggesting that, this is really their problem. It's a state problem. The state engineer has been given authority to resolve this problem, but it's the local water users' problem that they need to step up and do what they need to do. And there's really a good core group down there now that's stepping up and saying, okay, let's fix our problem. How are we going to do that? They came up with an original estimate of how we're going to take that, and it was like over 200 years we can get this problem fixed. And they set out a plan. We thought, okay, well, where am I going to be in 200 years? I mean, it just seemed like a really long time. The state engineer at that time came back and said, well, let's go 90 years. I thought, well, 90 years? I might not even be here in 90 years. I'm not going to be. But we tried to come up with some plans reasonable to how to attack this problem. And I think we've come to a resolution. It got to be controversial enough that the then Speaker of the House, Clark, actually ordered the state engineer out of the valley for a year, not to expend any funds, and he just told us we couldn't do anything. So momentum to try to get things taken care of to resolve those problems in that basin stopped. And it's actually been stopped for a couple of years, and we've been asked by the local people to come back in and help get those things going again. And again, that's what we're going to be doing tomorrow's meeting with them, to try to get a plan set up. But Senate Bills 10 and 20 actually give authority to these local districts to actually charge water users, people who hold water rights, to be able to help fund this district so they can form a plan and go in and actually they're going to buy some of the senior water rights as they become available and put them and hold them in a water bank in this local district so that they can supplement some of the water rights that have to be retired because of priority cuts in the basin because we're over allocated. And so this is kind of how they've come up with a plan to resolve that. Now there are several groundwater management plans throughout the state, and this has to be in a critical groundwater management area. And as Bob Fotheringham have talked about Cache Valley, we're in a groundwater management plan here. And there are some special conditions about how this valley operates. And as you walk out in the valley and stand knee-deep in water, it's hard to think, well, is this a critical groundwater management area? But it really is. The studies show that as you take groundwater, remove it from the ground, place it to use, it actually affects stream flows on a one-to-one basis. And therefore, we're very restricted here on what we can actually take from the groundwater under new appropriations, unless we're very sensitive to the needs of the downstream users and compensate those for depletions that are caused. And so we're looking at these kinds of things throughout the state, but this gives authority to actually assess water users to be able to help pay for operation costs and to help purchase water rights so that they can help get their water right back into a safe yield area. Under Senate Bill 20, it actually gives them authority to obtain a water right for high spring runoff that they can actually take and recharge into the groundwater basin and use that as a tool to help the groundwater basin recover. And we thought, well, that makes sense. I think they already had authorization under the statute to do that anyway. To specifically address these local districts and have that authority to do it and clarifies their authority. The Senate Bill 25, Senator Okerlund's bill, is a bill set up to address lost or destroyed shares of stock in mutual irrigation companies. When we have change applications come before us that are based on shares of stock, first off, we tell the owner that they've got to go back and get the irrigation company approval because that's a Supreme Court decision. You have to have the irrigation company's authorization to be able to file a change on a water right based on a share of stock. And then we ask them for a copy of that share of stock. If they don't have that, we tell them to go get it. Well, if it's been lost or stolen, there is a process under state law right now to get that back, but it requires some significant bonding and oftentimes legal processes that they have to go through that's very expensive and very time-consuming to try to get those shares back. The amendments this year come back and provide a public notification process that you can go through that provides an easier way to get those stock certificates replaced and that the company can recognize them, that you would be able to use them as evidence of your ownership of share and change applications. So I think it was a good thing, and it was one thing that the Executive Water Task Force worked on this year and the Utah Water Coalition to try to come up with some good recommendations on what could be done to help shareholders get those and companies to help get those shares put back into good standing. Under Senate Bill 26, it talks about water law modification. Senator Dayton actually sponsored this one, but it's a change in the statute about certificates issued by the state engineer. Right now, the law says that if you're issued a certificate, that you have to record that with the county recorder, and you have to record it within 30 days. Well, I ask the question, what if somebody doesn't record that within 30 days? What do I have to do as a state engineer? I got an enforcement order, so I don't have to go arrest somebody because they didn't get the certificate registered or recorded with the county recorder. I thought things aren't making sense here. And there's been some changes in appurtenancy laws with title and water conveyance over the years that I think the significance of the actual recording of the water rights certificate with the county recorder is not quite as significant as it was a few years ago. And so I suggested that maybe this ought to be done away with, and we don't even have to record it. We had several people on the Executive Water Task Force that were very concerned about that and said, well, let's make it optional. And I'm fine with that. And that's what this law does, is says you don't have to record a water certificate if you don't want to, but it gives you the option to do that. which addressed both concerns. But that was an important bill to me as we looked at it. It doesn't do much, but it gives people some options there. Sterling talked about the temporary water shortage bill under Senate Bill 102. Last year they asked me my opinion on the bill and the modifications, and it actually was 2 years ago. We passed a bill to repeal the section of the statute to give anybody priority during times of shortage, thinking that there is a priority system in the state. If you think you're going to need water during times of shortage, you ought to go out under that priority bill, either make agreements with people who have water rights or get your own water rights with early priorities and make sure you plan for your future. The Utah League of Cities and Towns wasn't overly excited about my opinion on that, and they pushed to try to get things established. The bill actually 2 years ago was repealed with the condition that it had an extra year effective date to give people time to sit down and talk about what was happening with emergency situations. And as Sterling explained, that during emergency situations, emergency times of drought, when the governor declares that there is an emergency, special entities, individuals, municipalities, public water supply systems have a right to be able to take water out of priority and use that water. We got put in the bill that if they do that, they've got to compensate the people whose water they are taking, which is, I think, a good thing. This year they brought up the military facilities as going to be part of that, to be able to take water. They asked my opinion on that one, on whether that should go through or not. I asked them, aren't these military facilities the ones like with tanks and guns and things like that? And those are those people. I said, during times of shortage, those people can probably do about anything they want to do. And so I'm not going to be the one to go up and hold up my stop sign and tell you not. So I thought if towns and cities can do it, military facilities certainly are okay with me. So it's worrisome letting people take water out of priority, and I'm concerned about that. But I am not Sterling. I'll turn that over to Sterling, who can stop these military facilities, right? Yeah, I was a little worried about that one. Anyway, Senate Bill 108, joint use of canal or ditch. And Senator Stoll worked on this. We had some people. The statute used to read that if there is an existing ditch and you had a water right you wanted to put in that ditch, you had the right to do it. You could just go put your water in as long as you you compensated the ditch owners and helped pay regular operation and maintenance and help pay for improvements and the things that you caused. We had a couple of situations this last year where people went to the companies and said, we want to put water in the ditch, and they said no, and they said, well, the law says I'm going to, and they just started putting water in their ditch, and there were some real conflicts there. And so Senator Stoll came up with a plan where you've got to actually get it says you have to negotiate in good faith to form a written contract before the use or enlargement of another person's canal or ditch can be done. And I think that's a good thing. I know we had, on the enlargement issue, we had a canal down in Green River that the canal was, I don't know, probably about 4 or 5 feet deep and about 10 feet wide. The user down at the end of the ditch wanted to put some additional water rights in there, and he got a track in saying that, well, he's going to enlarge it because the statute says he could, and the ditch ended up, I would guess, about 30 feet across and 15 feet deep. And the company, I mean, they didn't know what to do. They contacted their attorney, and this now almost a river was going all through the farm property. I thought, this is not, something doesn't seem right on this thing. I went down to inspect that, got along the banks of it, and put grabbed onto one of the fence posts that the guy who had enlarged the ditch had securely put back into the ground next to this canyon of a canal, and I grabbed the pole to swing around and found out that it was attached with about 4 inches of dirt. Grabbed that pole, and I started going down the side, and luckily I was able to catch and climb back up, and this is not good. But the end result in this is that if anybody, they have the right to enlarge or put their water in a ditch, now under state law, but they do have to pursue in good faith to get a written contract to be able to do that, and I think that's a good thing to have in place. House Bill 428, the Water Issues Task Force, Sterling talked about that. As far as I know, those positions have not been assigned, but will be done by legislative leadership, and we'll be looking just at specific issues. It says they're supposed to report on nonprofit mutual benefit corporations in state statute as they relate to mutual water companies and water development financing, and that's their charge, and they're going to be involved, and you're going to want to watch that committee and see what they do and see what their recommendations are. Also authorized in statute again this year was the reauthorization of the Executive Water Task Force, which I think is a good thing. And this is a group that's been authorized by the legislature probably for the last, 4 or 5 years, I think it's been in existence, to kind of review water bills, pull interested water entities together and kind of talk about water bills before they go to the legislature. I know Vonine is part of that and has done an excellent job representing her area up here to make recommendations on laws that need to go through. We found the bills that had gone through the Executive Water Task Force this year went to interim. They were approved in interim, and within the first couple of weeks, the legislature, they'd gone through the whole process, and it was really good. And so if there are things that you want to do as far as changing water law or having water issues addressed, this is just an excellent group to get your issues before them. And we're very supportive of that. In addition, there's the Utah Water Coalition who looks at water right issues and have been very valuable in reviewing water concepts and water law changes throughout the year and making good recommendations, and they seem to represent us well up on the Capitol Hill. I just want to talk just quickly about beneficial use here a little bit. State engineer issues about 6,000 decisions a year. We have to process through our office. We try to base those decisions on science and law. We have about 2,000 of those where we have protests or concerns filed on our decisions. We will make a decision after we consider all the information that's come in. Of those decisions, about 120 of them per year, we have requests for reconsideration to administratively look at different alternatives or to further consider issues that we ought to be looking at. And then we will make a decision after that. Of all those decisions, about 10 per year we have appealed to district court. Some of those go on to Supreme Court review, but it's about 10 a year. But those are the kind of decisions we have to make. And I want you to understand today how we make some of those decisions, and that's what I want to talk through just a little bit. But to do that, we need to understand some basic definitions that all of the water in the state is property of the public. Okay? And that's by statute. Also, beneficial use shall be the basis, the measure, and the limit of all rights to the use of water in the state. Beneficial use. And I want you to focus in on that beneficial use, and we want to talk about what that is. There are several characteristics and attributes of water rights. As you look at your water right filings that you've made, there's diversion locations. It'll talk about ownership. It'll list a priority of when you have a right to be able to take your water. There's diversion flow limitations and diversion volume limitations associated with your right. It'll talk about storage limitations and just different attributes that they have, but that gets into talks about the use of the water. And again, beneficial use is the basis, the measure, and the limit of the water right. But it'll talk under the use of water where you can use it. It'll talk about how much use you can have. It'll set some limits there. And it'll talk about a period of use that you can actually use your water for. When we consider change applications, we try to avoid enlargement to make sure that you're not making your water right better than it was historically. We limit water rights to historic diversion and historic depletions associated with the water rights that you've been authorized to do. And again, use is the measure and the limit of the right. And so we watch very carefully as if you take a water right and change it to some other use, duties may change or the amounts of water that you can actually divert, but we will watch very carefully about the depletion and the impact that you have to the hydrologic system to make sure that you are not exceeding the limitations of your water right. Rule of thumb we use is if you want to get something, you have to give something up. Okay, you've got to give an old use up to get something new. And if you've got a water right that has no beneficial use associated with it and you want to give that up and you'll create a new use, you're going to find the state engineer very hesitant if you don't have something that you're actually giving up. And oftentimes the state engineer will come back and then look at your applications, and we may condition the approval rather than just reject it. We may come back and say, okay, to keep everything in balance, to recognize what the beneficial use of the right is and what the limitations there on diversion and depletion, we may come back then and condition these approvals to keep those limitations in balance and in harmony with the historic diversions and depletions. There are some court cases that refer to this beneficial use, and I'm not going to go through everyone. And we wanted to read this Becker v. Marble, and this is clear back in 1897 when this decision came up. But the other decisions I pulled out, very similar comments where the Supreme Court ruled about this beneficial use. It says, the rights of a prior appropriator are fixed by the extent of his appropriation for a beneficial use. His right being fixed, he cannot enlarge his rights to the detriment of junior appropriators by increasing his demands or by extending his use to other lands, even if used for a beneficial purpose. And so, I went clear through the Supreme Court, just saying, you've got a water right, it's set, there's some limits set, this is what you, like an irrigation right, this is what you can irrigate. You can't irrigate more acres than what you got a right to. Even if you're using it beneficially somewhere, you're limited to what that right says you have a right to do. Some terms to understand. Duty. Here in Cache Valley, we're at a 4 acre-foot per acre duty. Generally, there's a 3 in the southern end of the valley, 4 acre-foot here. But this is a maximum amount of water that the state engineer has set up, and oftentimes through the court has authorized, but it's a maximum amount of water that you could divert to supply the required use. Depletion is a potential consumptive use, or what's actually lost by when you use the water for your beneficial use. This is what's lost. Irrigation, generally, we assume it's about a 50% of the duty amount. Domestic with the septic tank waste or inside use that returns flow is about 20%. Municipal use varies on a lot of different background items associated with it, if there's secondary water, waste treatment, or reuse. But generally, a municipal use that starts as a municipal use has the ability to be able to deplete 100% of the water it diverts. Historically, that may not have been the case, but several municipalities are to the point where they are setting their systems up where they actually consume everything that they divert. I want you to look at this chart here. Just kick the chair when you're ready for me to sit. Okay. Irrigation water use concepts. And it's just a simplified drawing showing what I'm concerned about, what you need to understand. This just represents a piece of ground that we're irrigating. We've got P, precipitation, that is going to come onto the property. We're going to irrigate it with I, put the water on to grow. The crops will use through evapotranspiration, the ET value, and that's going to be lost to the system. Based on how much water you put on, the RO or runoff water from the field, and the return flow or through deep percolation, or even not deep, just return flow will come from that field and return to the surface waters, and it represents as a surface water in and a surface water out. We've got groundwater feeding the surface water, and this system works together to kind of keep everything in balance. Everybody downstream is dependent upon this staying the same. What happens then if we double the size of that irrigation field? The ET then increases, the RO and the R decrease. We don't have as much water going back to the stream. There is not as much water available to the downstream users as historically there was, and people are going to be impaired. And so we watch very carefully to try to keep this kind of thing in balance. Somebody brought up to me, okay, what if I'm surface irrigating, I'm putting 4 acre-foot per acre on this acreage, and the crops are using 2 acre-foot, then go back to the stream. What if I go to a sprinkler system? I guess I'm still of the opinion, if you put 4 acre-foot per acre on with the sprinkler system, you're still going to return a lot of water because the crops will not, you can apply it more efficiently. I'm personally of the opinion that when you go to a sprinkler system, you in most cases, you probably will increase your ET a little bit. You'll get a little bit more production off the land, and if you get more production, there is an increased evapotranspiration, which will decrease return flows to the river. But if you're within your water right, you're authorized to do that. You're authorized to irrigate those acres. We don't require you to be inefficient in trying to deliver your water. Some things to think about, and I'll just go through these quickly. Irrigation efficiency improvements. Where does saved water come from, and where should it go? And this is just a representation. We've got a surface water delivery through open ditches, going to a sprinkler system. Most people, I've had people come back to me and says, okay, we've got put all of our water now into a pipeline, and we've got it down the other system. We've got a lot more water now than what we had before we put it into a pipe. And so we want to be able to irrigate half again as many acres because we've got this extra water. Well, what's the answer to that question? We go back to that slide showing the ET and your water right evaluation. You've only got a right to do so many acres. Historically, that water through the surface ditches recharged the aquifer, it fed the streams, and it's going to downstream users. And to do anything else with that other than to leave it in the system would impair other users. Reducing waste to maximize benefit is encouraged. You're encouraged to get your water to your fields and to use that in an effective manner. But reducing waste to enlarge use impairs the rights of others. If you're increasing your beneficial use of water outside of the limitations of your right, it will impair the rights of others. When we look at change applications going from ag to different kinds of use, it was mentioned earlier that we go to home use, and in some instances home uses don't deplete as much as agricultural use, and you have more return flow. But yet there are diversion limitations that have to be stayed within, and we just have to evaluate that as we look at change applications that come before us. If you took all of the agricultural water and put it into bottles of water, what happens to all that water? Well, it's 100% depleted then from the system, which is twice the depletion that you normally get from an agricultural system. And we've had proposals like this come before us before, and what we've done is actually limited the diversion to the actual depletion associated with that water right. And so their diversion was essentially cut in half, but you can put it all in bottles because that's historically what was depleted. And so we watch that very carefully. Yep, okay, so let me just finish up here. Evaluation of a water right, major elements, just wanted you to look at this. If we have a water right with 2.5 cubic foot per second, diverted from Spring Creek, it's used for 100 acres of irrigation from April to October, what is the beneficial use of that water? Now, we've got a lot of people looking at that 2.5 CFS. Well, I've got that 2.5 CFS in my hands and control. I can use that for anything I want to use that for. And under state law, and as supported by Supreme Court cases, the beneficial use, you've got to go down to the use, that's 100 acres. Here in Cache Valley, we start looking at crop consumptive use. The net irrigation requirement is almost 24 inches. Looking at a 50% efficiency, irrigation diversion requirement is about 48 inches or 4 acre-foot per acre. And this is where the for duty came from here in Cache Valley. Crops need about 2 feet. If we allow you to be 50% efficient, which means 50% of that water is returned to the groundwater or to the surface streams, you can divert up to 4 acre-foot per acre. If you don't need 4 acre-foot per acre, you divert what you need in order to supply that 23.62 inches of irrigation. This is just another graphic, again, showing how the return flow works, and we're trying to protect the downstream users. I've talked about this situation where we've had to restrict some uses to actually the depletion. If you go to something that's 100% depletive from a non-100% depletive right, you will be restricted to diverting only those amounts of water that have been depleted. I won't have time to go into this, Bob, but I'll just kind of end here. This is a discussion. I noticed there's an article in your newsletter that Will wrote about declarations of beneficial use, and it talks about trying to identify water rights. This is just a quick example showing this is an actual water right in irrigated acres in Utah Valley that has all of these water rights overlain. And we have some questions. Okay, what's the beneficial use of each of these water rights? And we had one of the farmers come to us and wants to sell one of these water rights. So what's it worth? This kind of brings up like 11 questions that are unanswered about what the beneficial use limitation is and how should it be restricted. And there is a process to go through now to file declarations of beneficial use for you to identify what that beneficial use is. But the point of my message today that I really wanted to make was that beneficial use is the basis, the measure, and the limits of the rights to use water in the state of Utah, and that's how the state engineer and the Division of Water Rights evaluates any application that comes before us, is based on that beneficial use. And it should be active beneficial use if you want to change it. We should have some good evidence that that water has been used in recent history. Okay, that's what I have. Thanks, Bob.